The experience of being human has many universal qualities that make it easier to learn together than apart. The purpose of Emotional Warrior Radio is to bring the learning processes one goes through in talk therapy out into the world, so everyone has the opportunity for growth. Come and join us on this journey. Welcome to the third session with our guest who is processing a once persistent yet unknown resistance to setting boundaries with her mother. As we continue to explore, we start to find that the defenses she built against knowing why were there to protect her from many difficult feelings for her mother and the past, which she must now face in order to be true to herself. Practical steps are laid out for her to have a discussion with her mother in this session, but the most important part of this discussion is her ability to feel, process, and describe what she's experiencing inside. So, welcome. And we were just chatting before and talking a little bit about how you were feeling and where you're at in your process now. And why don't you share that one more time with everyone?
Yeah, thank you. I was just saying I'm feeling very scattered. I have all of these things that I've been processing, and I've written them all down on separate sheets of paper, but I haven't quite put all the puzzle pieces together yet.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the things too, is that we are doing that. We are getting a lot of information out there that was unconscious, and it's kind of like looking at a puzzle piece and not knowing, well, okay, I didn't even, I don't know where that goes immediately because I'm just now looking at it. And then we do that work and trying to figure out where in the big picture it fits. So I think this is kind of the metaphor for building an understanding of yourself. This is like when people talk about self-awareness, I think this is a way of thinking about it that's really helpful, as putting together the puzzle pieces of your life. A lot of times people have only an awareness of maybe one part or a section, and it stays very disconnected from the rest, right? And now we're actually trying to bring it all together. So if that is helpful, I think that at least you're on the right, you're on the right path with feeling scattered. That's kind of natural. So what do you want to consider first with this?
Gosh, I do have, like I said, different sheets of paper that I've just kind of been writing things, and the little light bulb will kind of go off, and I'll have a little morsel of an idea of something that feels important, and then I'll put it in this category and say, like, okay, well, what do I do with that? So I did some reflecting about the ways that I relate to my mother, like in how I'm similar to her. And I've felt really like crap about that over the past week. And I talked to my partner about it last night, and he said, neither you nor your mother are monsters. You're not horrible people. You have these tendencies because you learn them from her. So that was actually very helpful. And then there's other things that I'm sure will come up naturally as we talk.
Yeah, but I think that that's one of the aspects that, again, is part of the last session in understanding the identification and not yet being able to really, you're kind of in the stage of seeing it, understanding it. And sometimes understanding doesn't feel good because I think there's a bit of a double bind here where we're wanting to heal and grow, but having to look at the areas that we're healing and growing are also due to somebody else's mess, missteps, dysfunction. So it's a little bit of a rub, to have this, their work as your work. Mm-hmm. But you recognize that it's, I think he said it right, is that this isn't really about you or her being bad. It's much more, or monsters or anything like that. It's much more about what is it that you must learn from this situation, this relationship, that I really think will benefit you. I mean, because that's the silver lining here, is that once you're able to work through, I think, the negative aspects of your identification with mom, you'll able to see her and yourself as stronger people. For the positive qualities, it's almost like we're cleaning up the mess of the associations and identifications right now.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, both people will actually come out stronger. Whether or not, and we'll see how far back it goes. Sometimes if trauma is too deep or that there's a wound that they never are able to recognize or acknowledge, I think that that's sometimes difficult to say, okay, that's all healed up. But you can definitely move past it. And that doesn't have to be something every time you interface with her, you feel. So there will be healing to it, but it'll be personal. So yeah. And I think today too, as far as how we're going to think about it, we're going to put the pieces together and we're going to start to see about what resistances are there possibly, and why verbalizing how you feel, what you know about what you want your relationship to look like with her, why that's difficult. Okay. So, but we'll get there by the end. So why don't you say a little bit about what you're thinking now, though? What came up as I was speaking?
Just the very last thing you were saying. So I did do some writing like you asked. I basically ended up writing like a letter to my mother, and it started out with things that we were already talking about in the last two sessions of, her visit and how upsetting some of the, things were, like the specific things about her dog, being left with us. And then it got to a place where, knowing that I wasn't necessarily sending her this and that I could just write openly about how I was feeling, the meat and potatoes started to kind of come out there. Mm-hmm. And I actually got into, a heavier truth of it, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And what do you feel was the heavier part of it? Not just the things that happened, but what the things implied.
I can read a little bit of it. Sure. I talked a bit about how both me and my brother have had a hard time, being independent from her physically, financially, and emotionally. She's always made that hard in big and small ways of, trying to stay financially stable is something that I've really fluctuated with. And my mother will be there to help, but of course it always comes with the, I did this for you and now it's transactional kind of thing. And with my brother, it was like that for a while for him too. He had trouble moving out of her house until he was like 26. And then he just married someone who, had a bit of money, and now he has a comfortable lifestyle.
Okay. Yeah. But I think what, when you say the word trouble, you're having trouble, can you go one step deeper with what you can at least detect as far as the trouble means, like emotionally, like why it was difficult, why you think now with the information even that you have that it was difficult?
Yeah. For a little while, I was thinking, I'm not sure if my mother ever taught me how to be financially stable. I think the one thing she really taught me about my finances was how to balance a checkbook. She's very organized and, taught me the importance of balancing my checkbook, which is funny because in this day and age, I don't really need to balance a checkbook anymore. Right. But it was something that I just didn't know how to do for so long. And I could always turn back to my mother saying like, oh, I don't really know how to do X, Y, and Z, in college, right? She would buffer and help, but not really teach me how to, sustain myself financially. And it always kind of turned back around to, well, maybe you should just move back home if you're having trouble.
Ah, that was said.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a pattern for a while. And even in the height of the pandemic, when, everything was shutting down, I lost work in Durham just 2-3 years ago now. And God, not even that long ago. And I did have to move back home with her because I had left my entire life in Florida. And I didn't really have anything when I went to this new job. And the person, it's funny because the entire job is another cycle of my relationship with my mother, where someone was financially supporting me to live in this city and pay for everything to work for them, which was lovely, but ended up being a very similar sort of abusive codependent relationship that I have with my boss.
Yeah.
of all people.
Well, I mean, that makes sense, unfortunately. Right?
Yeah, I know. When I saw it from the outside, I was like, of course, I would have done anything to get out of Florida at that point. But of course, that was, the way that it went. And I ended up going back with my mother because this woman sat down with me one day. I mean, she's my age. We sat and, I thought we could resolve things. And she was like, I think you should leave or it's going to get worse for you. Basically telling me that she was going to keep treating me the way she was going to treat me unless I got out of there. And I was paying for this really expensive apartment with this really nice income that I was getting, and I had a small severance and nothing else. So I paid like the last month of my apartment that I wasn't even living there, and I was wiped out yet again financially. And the only person there was my mother.
Right.
And yeah, so I ended up moving back to my parents' house for a very short time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that that's a great story to show how many ways that, your conditioning and not being taught, but being, not being like, let's say the story about being, taught to fish or being given the fish. So she is feeding you, giving you the fish. Maybe she teaches you a little bit about something that she enjoys, like organization, checks and balances. There is some benefit in that, and obviously as a child, you want some of that to a certain extent, but part of parenting is taking that up the next level. Unless, again, there is something underlying about, I really do want to keep this person close. Whether or not she's conscious of it is, not something that, we can really say. A lot of times they're just not. But it's a matter here of, you understand the trouble is in leaving her is that she was responsible for teaching you and she didn't. And instead replace that. She didn't leave you, cold out on the street. She replaced it with giving you something, which then really starts to replace the learning of figuring it out of, okay, you're having a hard time. Let me see if I can't, help you understand how to work through this emotionally and get on your feet where you are. Something where, there's still support, but there's this teaching and there is, more of a hand holding than a totally coming up to rescue through certain things. And I do think that is something that if it's in the relationship, by the time you're going to college, it will, both your brother and yourself, like you said, had trouble because there wasn't this understanding of how. Now we just know how to ask for help from mom. And that's the person. In some ways, by the way, this kind of way of parenting and being with your children will actually put them into a kind of a mode of motivation or a mode of seeking out higher risk things. So, because they know they always have mom to fall back on or mom to go back to. And so I can go and try this and I can go and try that and I can go and try this. And I'm not really developing myself because I've got this safety net. And that sometimes is also issue with developing a self-identity, a personal identity that maybe was also happening here.
Yeah, that was me in high school for sure. I had mono for like 6 months in high school. So I was out of school and
Wow.
kind of living on the couch and having mommy take care of me. And while I was sick, I still got away with my mother was, my mom was the cool mom, as my partner puts it. He knew me back in high school and he was like, your mom was always like the cool mom and you got away with everything. And I was like, yeah, I did. I would go out until like 5 a.m. and just waltz in the door and I wouldn't even have to sneak back in.
Right. Right. And what do you think that is exactly it? There it again, it is when you parent, you create structure for where's the yes, where's the no, where's the answer to me, where's the self-discipline. Like the child is learning through discipline, through rules, through structure, and it's self-discipline, right? And accountability and what's healthy, what's not. Why do you think that she lets you get away with so much? Can you think about her, like what that means about her?
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear to me because her mother was more of the disciplinarian. And while she likely had a lot of the tendencies that my mother does with codependency, she definitely brought the hammer down a lot more than my mother did. And my mom, was still rebellious. And she was like, I know that you were going to do those things anyway. So I knew I couldn't stop you from doing them. At least if and not that she's ever said this, but if she's being the friend, then I'm at least still sharing with her emotionally instead of completely shutting down. If she's open to me doing whatever I want, then, she can be my buddy in that. And, I still, now that I am parenting, I see it on a spectrum of, super disciplined and super lax and wanting to be your friend. And there has to be some nuance there.
Yeah, there's definitely wanting to definitely be something in between that is more about each person separately, not one person. And this is why it's so important to work on your relationship, with your parent in your mind, because if you become opposite of them as well, you are still like them. If I'm never going to be like that, well, okay, but that is the motivation, and that thing then continues to affect you instead of you really freeing yourself up and then figuring out a way of being that is your own. And it could look like several different things, but it's not because of. And that is exactly right. I don't think people understand this idea of mothers becoming friends, a very narcissistic tendency of, I don't want to do the work to go out and have a separate life and have separate friends and ask my children to also hold space for me to have that life. I have to be here. I have to take care of them. They are my life and they will be my friends and my life too. So absolutely that gives now this leeway to, well, I wouldn't want to discourage them in any way, shape, or form, or start to show them that I am mom or different. I have to be the friend, the one that allows for everything. That is also going to create a difficulty, just to kind of mention this as we work towards it, in being able to say something to her that sounds even a little bit structured. If she's this open all the time, and willing and giving, and even though these aren't actually helpful qualities to have as a parent in total. It's nice to have some of it, but in total, it does make it difficult for your child to then have any sort of maybe opposition or any sort of difference to that, because it's too open, right? What's going to happen? And when I say that, can you imagine what happens to her when you break the glass of this facade, when you break the bubble here?
Right. I have averted myself from imagining at times because I talked about before, she's very fond of Xanax, and it worries me that, if me coming in as her quote unquote best friend is saying, these things that are potentially shattering to her, I've worried about, what she would do to herself. And I thought about that a lot this weekend, and a lot of anger came up around it. At first, it was a deep sadness about what could happen, and then an anger for her putting that on me.
Right. And can you talk a little bit more about what you feel she's putting on you in doing this?
It's the emotional luggage of being responsible for her reaction, not just, being responsible for saying it in the first place, but now because I've said it, I am responsible for the aftermath as well. Right. And that isn't my responsibility, and it's not anyone's responsibility but her own. But like you were saying, she is very unconscious of the things that she's doing and the way she's been doing them. So I struggle to think that she could see that she would take a step back to self-reflect, to see that she's, done the things that she's done.
Right. And this is where I think that and we'll take it one step at a time, but where overall what happens is that the enmeshment of the mother and daughter relationship really starts to become clear, and the emotional responsibility, and that you are asked to take responsibility in order to stay enmeshed and like her, and it's okay and cool, and the cool daughter and the cool mother, and this is how they cool live, like it's all cool. And then and then all of a sudden you have difference. You're different. You're an adult now. And I think this is where then we see the frailty of, by the way, some aspects of narcissism, how brittle, how violent, how difficult dealing with a mother or a father with these tendencies and relating to somebody or to you or to anyone is for that other person. Because it is something that absolutely feels safe in getting close to, because there's something that they're giving you. But as you can see, there's something they're depriving you of when you're in that space, which is a voice, which is difference, which is teaching you something that will help you be independent. There's a lot that's not in that space with them for you. And I think that's where, as you start to kind of try to pull apart, you see why, that she's very insecure inside, that she emotionally isn't separate and secure and understanding of herself, that, she's very much, maybe rose-colored glasses and maybe thinking everything is fine. But here you're having this experience where, and then I want you to talk a little bit more about what you as an adult, you're having an experience of what are you wanting? What are you imagining that would feel better for you? Just
right.
You.
And in regards to like my relationship with my mother, that would be, the relationship that we both do want, to be close and to be, to have that, person to confide in as an adult child of somebody. But I haven't, that it's just not possible with the way that our relationship is right now, because I can't confide in her at all if I still feel like who I am and the way I live my life isn't meeting her at whatever she wants. I can't like lay those things on the table and say, this is me. I don't know if you knew me, but this is who I've figured out I am. I don't know how I could be as close with her as both of us would really want, the way it is now.
Right. So what I hear, and we do this a little bit, is just a way of showing that a lot of times in codependency, our mindset does consider, when we even speak informally, the other first. And I do try to prompt you to speak about you first, but it's like, swimming upstream.
Yeah.
So I just want to show you, though, that in how you talked about that, my intention isn't to hurt, but to be close and to allow for, or to build. I want her to be my mom. I want them, like what we call a maternal support. I want the maternal function, we call it. We hold, we contain, we allow for you to come in and go out without obligation, or it's okay, it's an exchange. And I think that a lot of times in these types of relationships, there's such a equality, or meaning like we're same, not maybe that's equity, but there's some sort of same about the where you're coming from, that the child never really gets to have a mother that's like that. It's always, I'm more mature. My mom needs me to be more mature. I hold all these responsibilities and feelings for mom. I must be more mature. And at some point you really would like, it sounds like at bottom, for your mother to be somebody that you could speak to honestly about your life without having to change what you say in order just to accommodate the conversation to connect with you. Because right now it sounds like you're not able to talk about who you are, how you live, what's important to you. You have to instead do what when you talk to her and you spend time with her?
I mean, I don't even know if I get a chance to talk about myself and my life. Her favorite topic of conversation is to go into whatever woe happened with her that day, or whatever is bad and happening that week. It is hard to get a word in for most people when talking to my mother. So, and that's where the kind of dissociation comes in. Even on the phone, you're just kind of disconnecting enough to get through this conversation because you don't want to take on the emotional baggage that she's laying at your feet. This happened, this was horrible. We're trying, we're doing okay, I guess, but then that happened. Like when someone passes away in our family, it's often a narrative of, I can't believe that happened to us, or that happened to me.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah. So you kind of just shut off enough to get through a conversation, and you're lucky if a question is asked of you. But normally if it is, it's, oh, by the way, can you do some work for me?
Yeah. Oh, right. Right. I actually, before you go, I have something for you to do.
I spoke to my mom this week, and I'd kind of been avoiding her. I've been sending like very short text messages, but I did have a phone conversation with her, and of course it came up. I almost had like a bingo checklist.
Yes.
Is mom gonna ask me to do work for her this week?
Yeah, you know what? But that's actually part of the technique, is that she's predictable and you're not, that we can't necessarily change them, but that you can predict what is going to be said. So you can limit the amount of time you plan the conversation. So you stay as long as you possibly can, with a boundary up, energetically even, and then you can, see that ending thing and kind of, oh, sure. And then, move on with your day and go, wow, that went according to plan. And I'm not, according to, that was predictable. And according to my plan, I feel like at least I had a plan set to stay objective, and I did. And I can pat myself on the back for doing that way, because I didn't get sucked into something. I didn't start to emote or feel taken over by what she's doing. And I think this is the thing, is like, I can see where your apprehension is, and anyone's apprehension, and saying, I really want this from my mother, but I'm not sure she can give it because she's so used to me acting fine with all of this all the time, and accommodating it, or being, and now you're learning to be objective with it. But I do think that there is the possibility of letting somebody know, almost in the order that you feel it, think about it, what you want specifically, and say it's a conversation to have. Because when you're able to present it in that way, the parent might be caught off guard and say, okay, wow, I didn't realize that the way that I talked, complaining all the time, affected you that way. That's generally, how I just talk. I thought that was okay. And say, well, but it does because I don't know what to do to help you. And I've heard this for a long time, and it's draining. So you continue to state that. And I would like for also, to be able to talk to you myself about my life, and for you to be curious about that. And, when you talk so negatively all the time, it takes up all the space. I can't get a word in edgewise. Oh, really? And again, might put them back. But, if you're presenting this as something I'm observing, this is how I feel and what I want, is then, and for you to respect my difference, right? I think that I'm also concerned that the way that I live my life isn't, that you don't approve, or you're not going to respect what I have to say, and I'm not quite sure if that's true or not. I mean, maybe you can, obviously give her the benefit of the doubt if she's not able to hear it out yet. And be able to then approach being like, but I do think that as I mature as an adult, I'd like to connect with you in a different way. And this, this can be taken a couple of ways. And, I can lay that out again for you in any way, shape, or form. But it's like, I think that I wanted to kind of pull all the pieces together for you to start seeing that in order to transmute or change your relationship with your mother, you have to change. You have to see yourself as an adult. You have to see yourself as adult in a relationship, as a stepmom, as pregnant and having her own child, as somebody who has a voice of her own, and pretty much has mom pegged because she's done the work. So no longer feeling so enmeshed or tied in with being responsible for mom's feelings, right? That in some ways that we look at, the longer we stay unconscious of what it is that, we're being trapped by, troubled by, the bigger it gets. And I want you to kind of, and then to talk a little bit about what you're experiencing right now too, because what comes to mind?
I think I have done a lot of work for myself. There were times in my life where I did fall right into the same similarities and ways of speaking that my mother did. I had a reckoning basically with my best friend a few years back where she said those kinds of things to me and said, I didn't understand it at all at first. I didn't know what she was trying to say to me, but if she was genuinely saying like the way that we speak to each other is hard for me emotionally. She was already in therapy and I needed all the help in the world. And it finally clicked for me one day that I talk about my issues and my problems without any kind of like, oh, do you have space for this right now? And now that's how all of my conversations with my best friends start. We talk about all of these things, but, oh, hey, do you have a moment to talk about something kind of emotionally heavy at the moment? And sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. And, it went really well in that regard. And it changed me massively as a person from that, it was a turning point, like about the time I turned 30, when I realized that I do those things that my mom does and I don't like it. So I changed that about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that was really coming up for me is that I have done the work. I feel more like an adult than I ever have. I'm sure I will once I give birth. It'll kind of set that in motion even more.
It will.
But I just want to be seen as an adult by my family.
Mm-hmm. And that's very important to you.
Well, yeah. And, I do have siblings, but I am technically with, me and my brother, I'm the youngest. And I was always the teenager who said, I'm not going to have kids. I don't want kids. I don't want to do that to my kids. I don't want them to go through divorce. I don't want them to go through all the woes that, I went through trying to grow up. That's changed because I know better that, that I realize it in the first place is the first step in not doing those things.
Right.
And so I changed my opinion about whether or not I wanted to have kids. And it's that disconnect of my family not knowing me as an adult who does want children and a family. And, when my brother first heard that I had been, playing stepmom, basically, a lot of his reactions around that were to scoff at me or like kind of chuckle. And even my mother did the same kinds of things. She, at one point, our kid was running down the hallway with a lollipop in his mouth. And I said, hey, please don't run with that in your mouth. If you fall, you could hurt yourself. And she just started laughing. And I was like, what's so funny? And she was like, oh, nothing, just you being a parent. And while she's recognizing me as a parent, she's infantilizing me as one at the same time. And I've gotten that from everyone in my family. I think I mentioned my dad saying, you sound so motherly. Like, yes, maybe now that you're hearing it, you will understand. So I've really wanted them to see me parent so that they could perhaps change their view in that way. But I'm unsure whether any of them respect me as an adult or a parent at all.
Well, I think that you're coming up to a point in your life too, where you psychologically, you need to see in some ways, like identify that they are not seeing you. They know you as a child, and that's it. Nothing changes in their world. That works for them. And you are less than the child, irresponsible. It sounds like something going on with like this scoffing at this idea of you being a responsible mother, changing your mind, doing things that are autonomous, that are different, that don't have something to do with somebody taking care of you, and patting you on the head. It's okay. I've got to let mommy take care of this, and this will be something that we discuss maybe once you have your baby. But the thing that I think is really cool is it's kind of coming forward for me is that I see you receding in the foreground as a person in this family, these powerful figures that are all giving, cool and knowing. And here you are in the background. They're kind of not really yet standing on her own 2 feet, like walking to the front and saying, I'm right here. So when I say that, like that, standing on your own 2 feet and walking and standing forward in the picture of your family and saying, this is me, standing up for yourself. What does that look like? Does that look angry? Does that look, again, another, something humiliating? I mean, it could look like anything. You can use your imagination too, as far as.
Yeah, I think right now it looks angry because I am processing a lot of things all at once. but even when I took the job in Durham before all of the pandemic happened, um, my I think my father and maybe my brother as well caught like a glimpse of me being doing that actual stepping forward and being more of a maybe perhaps hopefully respected figure in my family. I had I know my mother was going through kind of a rough time. My brother in his marriage, they were kind of having a rough time, and I had just gotten this excellent job. I knew I was going to be living on my own and taking care of all of my things on my own, like I've always needed to and, longed for. And I felt very confident, and I was able to give advice to my family members with, my own boundaries held, so that I wasn't really taking on their emotional labor, but I was just offering, if you need it, here is what I think of the situation from an outside perspective. And I felt really stable at that time. And my brother had spoken to my dad, and he said, I don't know what happened, but it seems like she's the only one who kind of has her feet on the ground right now.
Mhm.
And my dad relayed that back to me, and he was like, well, that's great.
Right. I mean, and that's a good example, I think, to work from, as far as when you are, that is like, you can remember that place that you were in again. We don't necessarily need jobs. And this is the thing, is that maybe because you felt that you had it all together on the outside, that you could be together on the inside. Right? You had the job, you were taking care of yourself, you were earning good money. That was where you were in that moment, when you could stand on your own 2 feet. Now let's take that stuff away. And why can't you still be like that, even if there is something around you that might be judged as not having it all together?
I feel like I ask myself that question all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if I have the answer yet of, is it the way I present myself, or is it the way that my family sees me? Do they see me as respectable when I have a job, when I'm supposedly on my feet? When I lost a job, I was back at my parents' house, and I reconnected with my now partner, who I've known for many years. We decided that I would stay, where I am now, for kind of a trial to see if we were okay at living together.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad spoke to my mother on the phone and said, you're just going to let her do that? I'm in my mid 30s, and this conversation happened between my parents last year.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I don't know if
It might be that. Yeah. So, I mean, meaning that it is in the way that you have not yet. There's maybe moments of strength and moments of assertion and assertiveness and understanding who you are, but there is still a very strong, in your mind, identification with what they want, what they approve of, what's okay with them. And that is why your strength is kind of torn, or it's twisted, or you feel innately like all of a sudden just bad about yourself. It just comes out of nowhere when you want to approach somebody with a boundary. It's like, well, who are you? You're going to need me. You can't put a boundary here. You're not responsible enough. You can't put a boundary here. This isn't good enough. You have to earn the boundary. Unfortunately, nobody's taught you how to have structure, to parent, to, and all of the things that you're doing for yourself, to think about how you relate to others, what kind of space they have to hold, each other's issues. All of this you've learned yourself. And so this is the thing, is that you're continuing to now learn how to, what I call, securely attach to yourself. Instead of continuing to have kind of like, and I don't know if this is too abstract, so if you have any questions, let me know, but there are mom and dad in your mind. They're objects. They don't talk like mom and dad necessarily. They just are objects in your mind that have voices that are pretty intuitive and implicit at this point, that can actually function as in ways of shaming you, of being smaller, of seeing the past you needing them. And instead of recognizing why, because you weren't taught, this was part of the deal. And you continued, to swim in that water and in that darkness until you started to figure out where the stairs were. But every time you found a stair, you stepped on it. You said, okay, I'm going to get out of this part and this part and this part. And now you're at this place right now where your self-esteem and self-worth, like we talked about before, are still tied to the external that the parent approves of. And will that ever happen? No. The thing is that they won't give that. Brother actually has done something interesting in the way that he's like jumped from one situation to another and taken up a position that allows him to stay. I'm above water here, but you have to stay in there. That's what they think. They don't recognize that you are pretty much halfway out, 3/4 out. You got about 25% more, and you should be fully clear of again, the pressure of this upbringing, this dynamic. Does that make sense? Did that kind of come together for you?
Yeah, I think the analogy of like the little angel and devil on your shoulder kind of came to mind, of that voice, the Jiminy Cricket, the song to Jiminy Cricket in the back of your head, who, tells you you're doing this wrong, or whatever my parents would say. And it's not in their voice, it's in mine, in my head.
That's right. Isn't it? It's incredible how much it's assimilated. And then that's the thing, is that why in this, but we can detect it by its critical nature. Why are you not accepting yourself? This is why it's so important to do this work. It's because it's that inner voice that's actually doing the worst as far as judgment goes. And and what comes to mind, why can't you accept yourself where you are and feel really aligned with what you know about yourself yet?
I feel like I, almost had it at that point when I had this great job, or any moment in my life where I felt like I had a pretty good job that wasn't, working in a restaurant or something more. But it is the parent voice of like, oh, you did something that's worth respect. And while you have it, you're allowed that. It's just that deep ingrained thought of like, oh, I lost it. And so now I've lost myself.
Right. And this is a real torch passing of power. And it really is difficult when that's the way that you think you need to gain self-respect and self-esteem with your family, in the world even, but with your family especially, because the act of torch giving and taking power, emancipation, you are independent, I see you, and then it being taken away starts to wear, that experience becomes very real for you, starts to wear you down. And even at a young age, it can. But I think that to put this into perspective, the learning here really is that taking up that model for thinking about oneself, that there is an it that can be taken. Who taught you that? And that's in so many people's minds, that we have it and we lose it and we go find it. We got to get it. And the it has a lot of different symbolic meanings to different people. But this, what do you think it is? Why don't you describe your it?
I mean, the it that I felt like I was losing and finding over again is bull. It's a nothing burger. It's not anything that is actually important to me. It's not something that I value.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, the new it, or the thing that I the things that I do value and that I do want for myself and for my life, I can't get from, you know, someone else giving me respect, or I can't get from any job I've ever had. I've never been fond of making money. It's not really that important to me. It's not a value that I have. So it is really messed up to think that I'm weighing so much on what someone else thinks I should have or need to just to live or to be an adult.
Yeah, or to be happy in yourself. I mean, this is the thing, is like, you're recognizing that your values and their values are different. And that's important, because for you, if you continue to try and accommodate in your space, in your life, within your idea of self, their values, you'll continue to feel lesser than. And that is a distinction you have to make time and time and time again. Though I will say this, just like your desire for pregnancy or for a baby changed, your desire for monetary independence might change. These are parts of our lives. In some ways, I feel like too, you do need to take a break away. You, in some ways, saying I didn't want to have a baby, we're saying I don't want to screw them up like me. You know, like you weren't saying anything about a baby. You were saying something about yourself.
Yeah.
Right. You know, about how you felt about what they did. Yeah. This is, again, this might not be necessarily as much about money as it might be about that you don't want to base your happiness, your self-esteem, your self-worth on how much you're making or how secure that is, or your mom's set of standards or your dad's set of standards. You've got to come up with your own. And it won't be like that. It will work in itself in a way that makes sense to you. See, and I think this is where the stances start to, like, we need to take a stand to show difference. But then really, we work our lives out in a way that it doesn't matter anybody else's view on these things as far as values are concerned. It only matters about what I'm comfortable with, and my partner, and what we're doing, and how we feel about contributing and what the give and take is, and all of these things. Because that becomes a very personal issue. But you take it off their table and you make it your own. And I think I kind of describing that because because of the way that you're raised is in such a black and white, concrete, dual way of thinking, that a lot of times when we see that we need to be different, we go all the way different. But that is fine at first. Then you can start to integrate all the aspects of yourself in there.
Yeah.
Right. So, I wonder too, when we revisit, and we're kind of coming to the close here, we revisit talking to mom about this text that she sent, or maybe not the text at all. Do you feel a little bit different about the approach now? I mean, about what the outcome, and you remember, it was pretty cataclysmic as far as you talking to her might send her into a real situation.
I think that I don't know, and I'm tired enough that I don't want to burden myself with trying to figure out what the outcome could be. Going over all the what ifs is, at times one of my strong suits, because I can, kind of see things clearly and take the best path. But I don't want to think about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired of thinking about it. And I feel like I'm at a point where I will cross that bridge when I come to it.
Mm-hmm. And in this way too, hopefully you can see that you're in some place like, okay, well, I'm really not going to carry that burden anymore. So why can't I just say what I need to say? If mom's feelings aren't my responsibility, if mom's values aren't my values, then why am I holding back on just saying what I'm going to say? Because her feelings are what she has to deal with. And if she goes off the deep end and my what if was right, then that's what she's going to have. That's her lesson to learn. It's not my responsibility. My responsibility is me and upholding, the work that I'm doing in this way, like your friend did with you. She took that step when she was doing the work to make sure that the work she was doing actually could be applied in her life, and then see how it affected you. And then that domino effect of change. But holding space for not doing it is also a challenge. Because what happens is that the anticipation of it that space in between gets filled up with some amount of anger, resentment, fear. It becomes overdetermined the longer you hold space for this to occur one day. So, right. So in some ways, I think that, we can continue talking, but I think that if you were to approach this more, not as a, can you visit or not visit, or kind of keeping her at bay, but more as, I want to have a discussion with you about some of the things I've been thinking about. And I need you to probably just listen for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And go through a way of talking to her about what you're understanding. And if she has no clue about what you're talking at the end, you can go, that doesn't surprise me. I needed to be able to tell you that this is where I'm coming from, and I'm going to continue to come from. You getting it is not my responsibility. So that's how you have a conversation with somebody that, is in complete denial. If they continue to be, if they even want to apologize or say, something like that, say, well, we can continue to talk about it. What questions do you have for me? I am open to having a conversation about how I feel. But I first want you to understand I feel this way and acknowledge it, not question it or deny it. So until that one stage comes about, you have to be open and take the bravery and the emotional courage here helps you grow. And the other side of this is that you understand what the first stage is. She has to acknowledge before you have a conversation. Mm. And I think that will start to really shift their perspective of you as a woman, as a mother, as an adult. So why don't you consider that? And you never have to do anything. This isn't like, oh, and then next week report back. As far as like, what did you do this week? That's not how this works. This is about expanding mind into different areas so you can consider new things. And as that opportunity comes about, you now have a map of it. You've right. built an understanding of yourself there.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if it does happen soon, because I have gotten the whole, I'd like to move down there soon, or at least have an Airbnb there, or when I get old enough, and I'm getting old, I need to be around at least one of my kids so that you can take care of me. All of those things have been happening a lot more often and in every conversation. And she's been talking about putting her house on the market. So it's really, it really is time to just have that conversation.
It so is. You're so vulnerable. Every time she says that, you've got, you need to do this for you. This is self-respecting, self-loving, self-integrity. You need to do this for you, because every time she says that and you don't, she weakens. In some ways it becomes difficult. So
I had a glimpse where I said, I'm uncomfortable with you moving here. And I didn't really know what to say after that. And I hadn't planned for what to say after that. And just kind of was met with awkward silence. And then, why?
But you know what? That's the thing. And then we'll stop. But that's it. Don't make it about the thing. They love to make it about the thing because they're always telling you the thing. And then you're like, oh, there's the rebuff, there's the feeling. So I want to talk about the thing. I want to talk to you about our relationship and how I feel. Don't talk about moving. Don't talk about the house. Don't talk about the weekend. We have got one thing to talk about. And this is what we're going to talk about before we talk about any of that stuff. And if she tries, bring it in, let's keep talking about this. And yes, I can tie it into why I'm uncomfortable with this, but we need to stay here and acknowledge this for a while, because until then, all of that is meaningless instead of talking about it backwards, because she might become defended and too chaotic, by the way.
Gotcha. Give her the why.
Yeah. Give her the why, and then she'll be able to move into I see how it connects. A little more information there. So Stay strong, and I will see you next week. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Next week in our final session, we will see if she was able to discuss her desire for respect and space when it comes to her family with her mother. However, whether or not she's able to do this is not the goal of therapy, but only that she continues to process and work through her feelings so that she grows ever more self-aware. But we shall see. Thank you for joining us, and I will see you then.